Hello, friends and neighbors. This is DJ's Album Share, and I'm your host, DJ Roller, and this is episode 16. This episode, I am lucky enough to talk to my dad, Dennis Roller. Dad picked a really cool album for me. He picked Wanted, The Outlaws by Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Jessie Colter, and Tompall Glasser. And honestly, I couldn't match the album. There's nothing that impacted music, all genres of music, the way that album did. So we had a really interesting time talking about this one album and the musicians that made it and the record companies that made it and just the time period that made this album. I hope you guys enjoy the episode. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can follow along, rate, review, and all that good stuff. But now you can come check us out on YouTube, and there'll be some video. So any way that you guys are watching the videos or listening to that podcast, I appreciate. And thanks for the support, guys. And I hope you enjoy this episode because I sure did. This podcast is brought to you by Carolina Sea Salts. Specializing in smoked sea salts, their products can be found at Etsy. Just search Carolina Sea Salts, look for the smoked sea salts, and tell them DJ sent you. Thanks, guys. Hey, Dad, what's up? Thanks for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about it.
Awesome. Well, you know, I've had a bunch of people on the show so far, and a bunch of them that are my friends, like Colin and Andrew and a couple other people have all been trying to give me an album that I can't give a response album to. None of them did it, but you did. Which is
That's my job.
Yeah, that's your job. That's right. I mean, what's crazy and the reason I couldn't come up with anything for this album to me, which we'll go ahead and talk about, we'll say what the album's name is. Wanted, The Outlaws, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Jessie Colter, and Tompall Glasser. The reason I could not come up with anything, three reasons. For one, the impact this album had on music as a whole. I think pop music, country music, a lot of different styles of music were influenced by this album. That's my first thing, is like I don't know of any other album that's been put out that's as influential across different genres. For two, it's a compilation album, so it's really like songs that had been previously released or versions of songs that had been previously re-released. So that was the second one. And then the third one was, you know, Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson and Jessie Colter, like those are some icons in country music, and there was no way I could match it. So.
And the only reason I picked it was, you know, for a fact, you know me too well, that my favorite songwriter in the world is John Prine.
Right.
And you guys have covered Prine, and when you asked me, I said I wanted something that was significant to the music industry, and
awesome.
These people did something that I preached to you the whole time you were young, and you'll get it before the show's over.
Sweet.
So,
well, I wanted to ask you first and foremost, I don't want to like tell your age or any of that stuff, but
I'm 60.
Yeah, well, what? All right, so how old were you when this album came out? Like, do you remember when it came out? Because this is something that my generation has no. We don't understand music the way your generation understands music. I had Spencer Ferguson on, and that was part of the questions I gave him was like, do you remember when this album came out? And do you remember what are there memories that it brings back and stuff? You know?
Yeah, I do. And I was this came out, what, 76?
Yeah, 76, right. The Outlaws compilation did.
I'm 15 years old at the time it came out.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't have shot me or held me to a stick or post and tied me down and make me listen to country music at the time. Mm-hmm. It meant nothing to me. You know, it was all about whatever was popular on the radio, whether it be the Eagles, of course,
right,
was really big back in that day. You know, we loved the Allman Brothers, you know, Eric Clapton, all the great groups. Everybody's in the Hall of Fame now that
right.
was during that time. But nobody listened to country because country was it was a stamped music that sounded the same. And
right.
Nothing wrong with what Chet Atkins and them did with country at the time. It sold. Right. But this album changed all that, and that's the reason I picked it.
And I think that was a quote I found because I did a little bit of research, obviously, before we wanted to talk about this. And this being the only album that we were going to talk about, I wanted to really and truly just sit here and talk about it and go in depth. It was a Glasser quote that he said that at the time when this was released, every style of person was going to buy this country album. Like there were people in the rock and roll world going to buy it. There were hippies going to buy it. Everybody was going to buy a country album. Which before this, everybody kind of stayed in their genres and didn't really break out of their genres, which is something really cool.
For me, what it did, it opened up the world to all the music that I liked after that, and that's what the importance was. It's it was so cool for them to look. Willie Nelson struggled for years. He was a great songwriter. He wrote Crazy.
Yeah.
One of the most iconic country songs that ever was that Patsy Cline recorded. It probably has every chord known to man in that one song. If you try to play it, man, it's a bow.
Right.
He wrote Crazy. He did. The one that everybody laughed at him about in Nashville was Four Walls.
Right.
What, Farron Young?
Yeah.
And he wanted to sell that to Farron just so he could eat for the week.
Man. And
Farron Young wouldn't take his money. Told him to hold off, gave him a loan, and he made that song such a hit that Willie got payments on royalties after that, and it
actually made some
helped
money.
him become who he became. You know, so all the old guys who was in charge knew how talented he was, but he couldn't make it on his own. So that's, to me, why this was his breakout from his period to what he was, trying to be what the establishment wanted him to be, to becoming what was really successful for him.
That's the point I was going to make is, I think a lot of that wasn't, I won't put on him, and it's more the establishment making him be something.
Willie. I mean, he was just trying
to
fit in, and
and I think that
sometimes you do things that you don't want to do because you want to fit in.
Right, and I think part of that ties in because some of the background I looked into, there's tons of context of why this album is what it is. Eventually becoming like album of the year in 1976, and it won tons of tons of awards and stuff.
And the first million-selling country album of
all time. Right. But there's some things I think that happened before that make it so significant, and it's just releases of albums, right? So 1973, you have Shotgun Willie, and you have Honky Tonk Heroes from Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson, right? So you have those two albums that kind of start.
That was the start of it.
The start of it. You know, Honky Tonk Heroes is considered to be the first outlaw album out there. That's pretty much widely agreed upon. And so you got 1973, those two albums come out, and then 1974 you got Phrases and Stages, and then you got This Time come out from both of those guys. So you just have this like doubling down. And so I guess credit should be given to Jerry Bradley. He is the marketing guy behind the whole record company to put this together as a record.
He only did it because he was scared he was going to lose out on money.
Exactly, yeah.
That's all it was.
There's a quote. There's a quote I found that Waylon said, "I like Jerry, but he drove me nuts. He didn't have a clue about music, but he was a good merchandiser."
Exactly.
So that just goes to show you, record companies can have good ideas and stuff, but a lot of times when they get to overstepping their bounds and telling artists what to do, I feel like people who listen to music can tell. They're like, oh, this isn't real. This is, you listen to that early Willie Nelson stuff. Although it's great, you can tell he's not in it.
It's not missing.
It's
not him.
Yeah, something's missing, and definitely the authenticity of his music isn't really in there. I found though that like it's pretty interesting that it was kind of a record company decision to put this album together, and they were like they wanted to really, they saw where the couple of albums that had come out. Waylon hasn't left the whatever, is it Atlantic or
no? He hadn't left yet.
He hadn't left, but
Willie
had.
Willie did Red-Headed Stranger, and it was becoming a much bigger success than what this record company used to.
1975 and Red-Headed Stranger, and then you have Jessie Colter releasing "I'm Not Lisa" in the same year. So you have all these things.
And that was a crossover hit.
Yeah,
they
all
went from
these
country over into
things.
pop, and absolutely.
And so I think that to me was something that we definitely needed to talk about to understand the context of why this album did what it did, because these are all Red-Headed Stranger, I'm Not Lisa, This Time, all these albums were they went from selling like 250,000 albums a year to selling millions of albums a year, within a couple of years. And so the record companies are going, oh my gosh, this is hot. We need to put this together in a compilation.
And they didn't understand it, but
they didn't understand it, but they knew that it was making money.
Right.
And so it's pretty interesting to me, like super interesting to me about how this all came about. Obviously, like you said, Willie Nelson has left. Is it Atlantic? I think it's Atlantic Records.
I can't remember. I knew he left his record company and moved
on. He left
on.
the record company. They're afraid to lose Waylon.
They were starting to record at the reason Tompall Glasser was a part of this, they were recording at Tompall's studio.
Right, his independent studio
Right,
in Nashville.
independent studio, and that way they could do what they wanted to do. They could make it sound the way they wanted it to sound, which is the outlaw sound, quote unquote, was born in an independent studio.
And I think that there's a moment where Jerry gets Waylon to agree to do this, but he said the only stipulation is you got to put Tompall's music on there.
Yeah, so he has Waylon was the one that insisted that Tompall was included in this.
And so that's so cool, man, because
although they fell out in later years and never spoke to each other again until they died. They said it was over money. I don't know if it was money, women, whatever the deal was. It
was also like the late 70s, too. There's a lot of shit going on.
It is what it is.
There's a lot of shit going on. But to me, the background of this album, knowing that all these albums were coming out, boom, 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 all these hits, and kind of they were doing it through an independent way or doing it their way, and this album was the record company's way of kind of going, okay, you guys are doing something that works. Let's put something out as a compliment. To me, like looking at it.
Well, they just went back on previous albums and pulled certain cuts and put it together. Yeah. But that's because they could get their cut off of it.
Right,
but because they had the promotion behind it, it became what it became.
Right.
But it also opened that door for them to continue to even do more of what they wanted to do, which opened the door for the ones that come behind them, like Hank Jr., David Allan Coe.
Right.
Even the country that I became so enamored with it at that time in the 80s, George Strait wouldn't have done what he did without this group doing what they did.
Right.
Although it's not the same kind of music,
it
gave him the freedom to open the doors to do it his way. He was one of those, even Alabama. Even Alabama, as big a supergroup as what they were, they made money because these guys opened that door.
Right.
The old established country people or the audience that was there would never have accepted them without this happening.
Right.
That's what's so
really
great
taking
about
it to
this.
a mainstream level. To where, like you were saying, a lot of these songs are crossover hits into the pop charts. You got the let me look at the track list I got written down right here. I think it's shoot. What is it? Honky Tonk Heroes was one of them. Suspicious Minds. That's the one. Suspicious Minds.
Yeah, Elvis recorded that.
Yeah, and it's so amazing to me for this to be like the first platinum country album, and it's really like a bunch of songs they've already released. That's even cooler. Yeah. It makes it even cooler to me because like in the artists' minds, they have to have a little bit of chip on the shoulder almost, kind of, because they're like, well, damn, I released this.
And they did. And they did.
Well, damn, I released this a couple years ago on this album, but y'all, because there's a couple of them that they released like Yesterday's Wine.
Oh, like great song, too.
It was released in 1971, and Me and Paul, both of them released on the same album.
Another great song.
Great songs, excellent songs. I really love Me and Paul, to be honest with you.
I do too.
You have tons of like stuff like that was previously released that then once it's released in 1976, then goes to the top of the charts again.
The correct combination and the correct promotion, and certainly
I think
the audience was ready for it.
Right.
And plus it drew in the young audience. See, like I said at the beginning, people my age wouldn't have been, you couldn't have tied us to a tree and made us listen to country.
Yeah.
But we like this.
Yeah.
We didn't consider this country.
Would also kind of fit the rebellious nature of everything else going on in music at the time, where it's like, oh, that's the status quo. We're the rebels. We're the ones who aren't doing it the way they tell us to do it. Also, you got Waylon and Willie tied in with the I wouldn't say just drug culture, but like the kind of the anti-establishment culture of the time, where they're like, fuck you to whoever's running the stuff.
That's right.
Don't care who's running it, fuck y'all. And I mean, that's been always the allure for me personally with Waylon and Willie, and the story of the outlaw movement and all that stuff, is they were the quintessential badasses. They were the guys in the time that did what they wanted to do. They had to fight, but they ended up doing it the way they wanted to do it. And, what can anybody else ask that plays music? Because both of those guys were traditional as long as they could. They tried to do the straight
they tried
country.
their best. They tried their best to fit into the mold.
And every time, they got shot down.
They never fit.
And so to me, it's as somebody who also has tried to play music and done different styles of music, you get kind of frustrated when you keep getting shot down over time and time. So I can relate with that angst almost.
What did I tell you at the beginning? Before this is over, you'll understand why I picked this out.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely can. I always have related. I've loved. I think I'm the same way. I never really got into country music until I had friends that were really into Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash, And this era of country music brought me to go, okay, this isn't square. This is pretty cool shit, you know?
Yeah.
Some of the track listing we can go through, but
it's a lot more than 3 chords and the truth. That's for sure.
Exactly, yeah. Although that's pretty cool too.
Yeah.
And that's what is, you know, that's what's awesome about music is I think that there's some context to life that needs to happen for you to understand some music. I've said this before on the podcast with Andrew. There's some things that I've listened to when I was younger and I hate this song, and then I listen to it when I'm older and go, God damn, that's a great song.
Yeah.
I didn't have the life experiences and the time to really understand the song I was listening to.
Why it was good.
Right, exactly. And I think that, you know, just maybe it was just that age that I started listening to. You know, I started listening to Waylon and Willie and all that stuff around that same. I'm 15, 16 years old too. So I don't know if it's the time period of people listening to it or what it was for me, but I also kind of generated toward that outlaw style of country music too before I got into more of the traditional stuff.
I think it has a certain element of blues and rock to it.
Absolutely.
It's country, but it has that element.
I think
so it draws people that I'm a blues guy.
Yeah,
you know, I'm an old blues rock and roll guy, but it has that element that draws me to that. And I think that's what draws you to it too.
Definitely. And Tompall was quoted as saying, rock and roll, they were just burnouts. So we just wanted to take a little something from them and not burn out. You know, like that was it. That was their thing, was they were doing something that was kind of rock and roll flavored, but the rock and roll guys were kind of like, they were extreme, going crazy, and they were like, oh, we don't want to go that far, but we want to take a little bit of something.
They didn't want to go tear up a hotel room and have to pay the bill. They just want to make a living and go on down the road to the next gig.
That's just Joe Walsh. Yeah. That's just Joe Walsh.
Yeah. Who, another favorite of mine.
Yes. Now, see, the one of the cool things I like to do is I like to find like really interesting stories about the album or a song that was written on the album. So earlier I found an article by the Tennessean, okay, about the original, about the first song, My Heroes Have Always Been Cowboys. The original writer for that, her name is Sharon Vaughn. She wrote the song. She was told to go home and write a cowboy song. Her quote, I was just told to go home and write a cowboy song. So she went home and wrote that song because she really loved like Roy Acuff and that whole like cowboy era. And she had just recorded a song written by W. Jennings. And so she goes into Waylon's office and she shows him the song. And he goes, well, that's not me. That's the guy's, I think his name is Willie Jennings or something like that. That's not, I didn't write that song. It's a cool song, but I didn't write it. Yeah. So she felt super embarrassed. So she runs back out to her car, grabs the song, brings it back in. She says, well, I wrote this especially for you. She didn't write it for him, but that's what she told him at the time. He plays it, and about the 6th time he asked him who wrote the song. She goes, I wrote the damn song. And he calls this dude in. He goes, we got a song to record this evening. And then it becomes the #1 track on this album. Yeah. It's such a cool a rock and roll story because throughout time, it's like Christopherson landing the helicopter on Johnny Cash's front yard. Like all those things that happen that make things happen just make the song cooler for me. Yeah. You know, and the fact that like she kind of put her foot in her mouth when she's like, I wrote this. I sang the song that you recorded. Did you wrote? And he's like, well, that's not me, but.
Waylon was great, but Waylon will tell you in a minute he couldn't turn a phrase like Willie. Yeah.
And the next thing, too, is like, you know, Waylon Jennings in this, like, in the mid-'70s, he's a fucking icon. Yeah. You know, he's I mean, although the outlaw movement is still just taking off, he's still just a bit larger than life persona. Yeah. You know what I mean? And and he kind of lived like that as well, I think. There's tons of documents of him just being crazy and over the top. And you know, and I think that for this person to go, all right, well, I've already struck out the first time. Let me give you my actual pitch while I'm here. Here's the song, and then he liked it. You know, that's a pretty iconic moment.
That is.
And I loved it. So that's the lead track. And then the second track, Honky Tonk Heroes, originally released in 1973. It's a great album. I mean, a great album in itself, but that song is an excellent song. I love it. So, yeah, I mean, there's tons of... You can literally go through every track, and they're just great song after great song after great song. It does suck that Tompall Glasser got upset with Waylon and his stuff isn't on streaming platforms. You have to find it on like YouTube.
I know, and you know why I like that part of what he did so well.
Well, yeah, and he
because you know I'm the humor guy. I love humor in my music. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons I like Prine so good. He can make you laugh one minute, cry the next. And of course, Glasser did the National Male Chauvinist album. Song of the nation that will never be topped with Put Another Log on the Fire. Right. And if you don't know that song, go listen to it. And you'll understand. It's great.
And it's amazing because he does like this nod to Jimmy Rogers, and then he does that, and it's just so many times you could tell he wasn't I mean, he has a lot of production credits on a lot of the stuff. I don't know if you're familiar, but a lot of the Heroes of All Being Cowboys and all that stuff, he's the producer. He's the one like producing stuff. So it's like, I feel like he's just in the time period, he's just producing music and he does a little funny stuff. And Waylon's like, you got to put this on here. So the fact that him like nodding, giving him the opportunity to play these little funny songs is great. I love it. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Absolutely love it. I'm going to go back to ask you a question. So you told me how old you were. How did any of this music, or is there a specific song or a specific artist, how did they influence you as a musician?
Honestly, that wasn't I picked it because of what it did for country. Mm-hmm. Influences for me was really not what this album did. It's what came behind it. But I know this.
But it opened the door.
I know this. I noticed the significance of what this album did for that. It's the reason I brought it up for us to talk about it today.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious because I mean I know that
Look, I'm a Willie fan, but I like other songs that he did more than these. Mm-hmm. You get what I'm saying?
Right.
I love Waylon, and I love the songs that he did on this album, but I love his whole body of work, not just what was on this album.
And but do you think that this album gave you the patience, not even the patience, gave you the idea to delve into their music more, I guess would be the question.
They kind of
opened the door for you.
It opened the door for me for
you to go, who's Willie? Let me check out his music. Who's this guy?
I'd have never listened to Hank Jr. if it wouldn't been for this album. I would have never listened to David Allan Coe if it had been for this album.
That was kind of
you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
All this stuff that came behind them actually became such a movement that you gravitated towards that segment of the music.
Right.
You weren't worried about look, different ones, whoever it may be at the time.
Glenn Campbell, for example. Right. Like, I love Glenn Campbell, but he's like super polished country in the late 70s.
Right, the Farron Youngs of the world, or whatever the deal was going on in country at the time, or the Porter Wagners, all that. It meant nothing to me. At my youth, I wanted to hear this other side.
Right.
And they actually finally admitted and called it country, and that's when you became a country fan.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because this is something you said to me ever since I was very young that I have no reference to. But you used to say the Eagles weren't country back in the day. But and I'm not saying they were or they are considered country, but there's a lot of like folk music elements involved in like some of the Eagles' early albums that somebody my age might listen to today and go, oh, that's classic country.
They were so far for what the country thing was at the time, they wouldn't consider them country.
Yeah, that's amazing to me.
Honestly, the Eagles, what I remember the most because of my age, was the Hotel California
late
album.
70s stuff.
Yeah, the mid to late 70s stuff. When they first started, and they actually had the banjo in it,
the Take It Easy and all that stuff.
Yeah, all that. You heard one or two cuts of it on the radio, but you didn't hear the whole album until you went and bought the album.
But is that like mostly pop stuff?
I never went and bought the albums until I was older.
Right.
And then I went back and delved into it, and I loved it. But at the time, you didn't have it.
Right. So my question would be, at the time, is that coming through on the pop side of stuff, or like where were you getting that Eagles from? Because like if they're not in the country charts,
they weren't in the country charts. So they had to be in the pop.
Pop music, right?
Yeah.
So from what my understanding is, that's what my question was. From my understanding, where were you got to go into the folk music area to find some of the Eagles stuff, or even like the pop charts? Because like at the time, the country charts, like you said, Farron Young, you got like Chet Atkins, whatever he's done, you little Jerry Reed and stuff like that. Like you gotta think like even Jerry Reed is pretty progressive.
That's why he didn't fit in any more than what he did, because he was more progressive.
So progressive compared to what everybody else was doing of the time.
And at the time, the people in charge, they thought that was the only thing would sell.
Right.
But what happened was the people that they were selling to still bought the country records. This album expanded their market.
The demographic grew.
The demographic grew.
Right. You've got the hippie movement and everything going on in the late 60s. You've got all this drug culture and everything going on in the early 70s and stuff. So there had to be some type of change. I feel like across the board, people were just mad at status quo. You know what I mean? Because you got like, you think about the difference between like Chuck Berry and Led Zeppelin. The same type of things happening right there, right? Or even the early Beatles and the later Beatles, right? They go through like a transition.
Evolved. Yeah.
So I think there's a ton of stuff going on right there where the music industry or the people that are listening to music are just tired of listening to the same old thing and they want something different.
Right.
I think that's across the board. It's just very interesting because my generation, although I'm almost 30, right? But my generation, and younger than me, definitely don't understand genres the way that your generation does. Because back then, the only thing that they was classified as country on the country charts was what the record label said was, and whatever's on the rock charts. You know, we don't get that. We have so much availability to go out here and listen to music.
Absolutely, you can pick up your phone and punch in anything you want and listen to it.
And then I can say, "Oh, is this country?"
At 15 years old, I had the radio.
Yeah.
And my mom and dad never took me to a record store, so I didn't go buy somebody's record and play it. It was what was on the radio, or if you had an opportunity to go to a concert, if you heard somebody's song and you thought, hey, I love to hear them in concert, a group of you kids got together, whoever could drive, and you go listen to them in concert, and then you come back with a whole different perspective. But you didn't just get to pull it up and go get it. It wasn't there. And it didn't fall out the air.
Yeah, and I think that's something a lot of people my age and younger take for granted. And that's something I love having you on to talk to you about.
When I go back and say that, see, I lived in the country on a tobacco farm, so I wasn't in town. Like, look, Spencer and all of them, I love them. They're great guys. I love them to death. He's my brother.
Yes.
But Spencer was in town. He could go down to the music store and buy an album or a single or whatever the deal was.
It was a lot harder for you to be able to do that.
I didn't have that opportunity to do that.
There's a lot more obstacles for you to be able to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think that's a time period. That's a time period statement. You know what I mean? Like, the one of our favorite songs of all time, "Operator" by Jim Croce, is very much the same way. Where it's very much a '70s time period thing. People my age and younger don't understand what an operator is. Like, you know what I mean? So like, there's some things that happen, and you're like, that would have only happened in this time period.
Oh yeah.
And the fact that like, radio and who put the songs on the radio had so much control over who's people are listening to, I think is the reason this album blew up the way it did, to be honest with you. Like, this was so much of a fuck you to the status quo of what was going on. There's people like yourself out here who can only hear what's on the radio.
They had no choice but to play it.
Exactly. That's mind-blowing to me. That is and I really think there's something like that going on in country music right now. You've got Colter Wall, you've got Tyler Childers, you've got some guys like that on the scene, Vincent Neil Emerson. You got some guys out there on the scene that are doing more of the style of country that I like to listen to, rather than like Luke Bryan or Morgan Wallen or whoever hell doing pop country right now. That I don't relate with. Whereas I listen to Tyler Childers.
Called that, don't you?
What?
He said that type of country is nothing but bad pop music.
That's so good.
He said that before he died.
Yeah, well, you know, he's a saint. He can say what he wants to.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, you have Jason Isbell, and you have folks out here doing it. And I give Stapleton credit, but he's a huge star at this point. You can't tell me he's not doing some type of stuff to appeal to the masses. I understand appealing to the masses. There is something about listening to Tyler Childers that I relate to more than I've ever related to a songwriter or a musician in my time, in my life. So
I love Tyler.
So to me, the album he put out before Long Violent History may be the greatest country album I've ever heard in my lifetime. So there, I feel like there's some relation to what's going on nowadays, to where I have actually thought, like, let's play, me and you own a record company, we're gonna put together a Wanted Outlaws album. Who would we have on it? I could put together about 4 guys right now that would
Tyler would be it.
Tyler, Colter Wall, and Vincent Neil Emerson, and then there's some Nashville guys that are doing some traditional stuff. I mean, I know people out there doing it, but it's amazing that, you know, history does kind of repeat itself. Sturgill's another one, yeah. There's a bunch of folks that history does kind of repeat itself. The industry kind of takes over, and they say this is what folks want to listen to, and then luckily nowadays we can kind of control what we listen to a little bit more than back in the day, and we can. And Sturgill Simpson can put out a bluegrass album, and then we can make it like #1 selling bluegrass album of all time. Yet the only thing it didn't outsell was like a Korean pop album, and that's just because there's like a million fucking Asian people. Yeah. So it's like I think that the things that are happening back then with the music industry are actually being paralleled now with a little bit more freedom from the artists, because they can put it out and I can get to it without having to go through a paywall of buying an album or whatever. And there's one thing I wanted to definitely talk to you about. You know, your statement when I was a kid of being like, you don't know what it's like to save your money up and go buy an album and it be shit, is the reason I started this show. So I wanted you to talk about that a little bit if you can.
Well, we didn't have a chance to buy many. So when you bought 10 and 2 of them sucked, man, they make you mad.
Yeah.
I mean, just
and I mean, also too, you gotta. I'm speaking through you, but you have no way to listen to it beforehand, or
no. You were going right off of name and maybe one song you heard on the radio,
album
and you
cover.
were hoping the rest. Yeah, the album cover looked great, and hey, I gotta have this, and you
That's
get
a
it
lost
home,
art.
and you get home and you listen to it, and if it wasn't any good, you go, dang man, what did I waste my money on this for? I don't get it that easy, you know.
Yeah. And I think that's something that is a lost art.
Now look, back in the day, I can't remember what the album sold for. There weren't that many dollars to it, but you didn't make but about working all day on the farm, pulling the barn of the backer, you make $10.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you spent
40%
of what you made that day
yeah.
on really hard physical labor on an album that sucked and you want to throw it away, it'd make you mad.
Make you feel mad.
Yeah.
You know, something that ties back into the Wanted album is the album cover, album art. Album art plays so much into me wanting to buy vinyl nowadays, right? Marketing, right? And it ties back into what you were saying of why this album was so successful. These guys with the record company knew that something was happening. They knew it was hot, and they doubled down on it. And to be honest with you, the most iconic country album cover of all time, their faces on a Wanted poster. Are you kidding me?
I know.
That's amazing. That was one of the coolest. Like, I remember
looking like real old West Outlaws.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I remember looking at that album cover and going, man, that's cool as shit. Yeah. I was 7, 8 years old. I didn't even play music at the time. But it has always been one of the coolest albums arts of all time. And it's part of the thing like you're talking about, like I wanted to discuss with you, is like my generation has no idea. Like we look at an album art and go, oh, that's cool, and listen to the music and brush it off, and we don't understand the significance of it. There's tons of thought that goes into the album track listing, how the albums are listed, and the statement that's being made with the album art.
Exactly.
And so like I think that it's sad.
Well, that's why I love your show. And I am a big fan of your show, and I am tickled to death to be able to finally be on it once, although I feel like I'm on it every week. You say, my dad said so-and-so, my dad said this, and I go, well, I did tell him that, but I don't remember it.
So we're having one of those moments in that movie Maverick where where Mel Gibson, he goes, well, you know, my old pappy used to say, and he goes, I didn't say any of that shit.
I didn't say any of that. That's right.
That's it. Yeah, you know, I probably project a little bit. It'll be all right. So, you know, we pretty much covered a lot of the stuff. Are there any tracks off of here that jump out to you that you just, you know?
No, I didn't pick the album for that.
Yeah.
I picked it for its significance in what happened in country back at the time and the way it opened the doors and way that type of thing changed what country sounded like for probably the next 20 years.
Right. I mean, and like I said, today I feel like there's some resurgence.
Today even there is some. There still is some influence in the world that's out there because of this album.
Colter Wall just recorded a Marty Robbins song, "The Big Iron." Right. If that doesn't scream outlaw cowboy country, I don't know what does. Exactly. And to be honest with you, all of Colter Wall's persona is prairie Colter country.
I don't really think that Waylon and Willie were trying to look, they enjoyed the success that they did, but I don't think they tried to piss the establishment off per se, because even later on when they did the deal about, I think this outlaw shit done got out of hand.
Yeah.
Waylon kept on saying, I'm tired of y'all calling me an outlaw. I really wasn't an outlaw. I just got tired of doing it their way. I just wanted to do it my way.
Right. And there's tons of documentation of that. And I really think you're right. I think this was more of a...
You know, Willie gave up and went back to Texas. He said, man, I can make a living doing regional.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, they blew up. And then he became more than just regional in Texas. So,
yeah, you know. I mean, and that is part of the Glacier quote that I started out with, is that whether this is a movement or a gimmick, it brought more people to country music than anything before. Exactly. And I think that's really the way they felt. Like, all right, maybe this is a gimmick that the record label's trying to do to get us to sell more albums, but at the end of the day, if it brings more people to my shows and it gets more people to listen to this style of music, then fuck it. We'll call it an outlaw movement, if that's what you want to call it.
If
you know what I mean?
you want to call it.
But I think you're right. I think that in their minds, it wasn't a statement like everybody thought it was. I don't think it was. It was a statement in that this is how I want to do music, but it wasn't a statement of fuck the establishment as much as everybody thought it was.
Right.
You know,
I don't think it was either. I think it was more of a people perceived it to be that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, you know, marketing's a son of a bitch, man.
Hey, marketing is
if you're
marketing.
Good at, if you're good at it, if you're good at it, and you can make everybody think that these are a bunch of rebels that want to, you know, take down the people like that. People like that story. It is a cool story. You know, I mean, it's a bunch of stuff that happens like that. To me, to be honest with you, we could sit here, we could go through every track, but I don't want to. I think we've talked about everything we want to do. Is there anything else you want to talk about this album?
No, I'm great. I appreciate you having me on.
I love you, Dad.
Next time, I love you too. Next time, I'll try to pick something that I'm more passionate about the music, and we can talk about the cuts.
That's okay.
And we'll go from there.
We'll do that next time.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Hey, I stumped the master. All you rest of you guys, you remembered I stumped the master. He had no comeback.
Got you beat. I love it. All right, I love you, Dad.
Love you too, son.
I'll have you on again. We'll do this again.